You know that feeling, right? You open your phone, you turn on the news, and it's just this relentless, overwhelming deluge of information.
It's completely overwhelmed.
And it feels like you're watching a massive manufactured performance.
Something designed to keep you off balance.
Exactly. And trying to figure out what's a fact versus what's, intentional influence becomes a full-time job.
And that is precisely why we're here. For this deep dive, our mission is to cut through that noise using the sources you've laid out to really provide some clarity on this rapid collapse of institutional credibility.
Okay, so where are we focusing?
We're going to hit three main areas. First, some audacious foreign policy shocks, specifically the Venezuela regime change. Then we'll look at major domestic accountability failures. Think Epstein and Russiagate.
And the third?
And finally, the big one, the all-out battle for who controls the flow of information that's hitting your screen right now.
Okay, but before we dive into geopolitics and, the darker corners of D.C., you started your notes somewhere much more relatable.
Yeah, I did. The source material opened with this very human reflection on love, actually, on how it's largely involuntary.
It's not really a choice you make, it hits you.
It just hits you. And that realization is almost immediately followed by, well, a profound sense of panic, especially for parents.
The source gave the example of holding his 4-month-old daughter.
Exactly. That fierce, primal, protective love. And the very next emotion was just pure fear. The panic of knowing that, no one gets through life completely unscathed.
That connection brings this immediate, terrifying vulnerability.
Right. And what was fascinating was the distinction the source drew between the pressures of raising a daughter versus a son.
With a daughter, it was about protection and looking to his wife as the main role model.
But with a son, the pressure was described as purely internal. It was this sudden thought of, I have to figure out how to teach him how to be a man.
It forces you to look in the mirror.
It really does. It's an immediate pressure to self-evaluate. And we bring this all up because that personal feeling of vulnerability, that need for trust and protection, it connects directly to the bigger picture.
To the institutions we're supposed to be able to rely on.
Precisely. Government, media, security. They're meant to provide stability. When they fail, that vulnerability we all feel is exploited, and societal trust just crumbles.
Which is a perfect bridge to our first major topic. Aggressive and, let's be honest, highly controversial foreign policy.
Let's start with that audacious military operation to remove Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela.
A huge shockwave moment.
It really was. And we saw Donald Trump just hours after the operation quoted as saying bluntly that the U.S. would run Venezuela at least temporarily.
And immediately tap its oil reserves.
Immediately. To sell to other nations. And the analysts in your source material pointed out how rare that is, that kind of shocking upfront admission of the financial motive.
Which makes the official pretext, the justification for it all, even harder to swallow.
Oh, absolutely. The official line is all about fighting narco-terrorism and drug trafficking.
Painting Maduro as some kind of cartel boss.
Right. But if you're so open about the oil, why even bother with a flimsy drug war story?
So, how flimsy was it?
Well, that's the key question. The sources cited a 2025 DEA fact sheet, and this document showed that 90% of all cocaine reaching the U.S. comes from Colombia through Mexico.
And Venezuela's share of that.
It's statistically tiny, which made the drug pretext feel, and this is a quote from the notes, like obvious bullshit. It was just an easily disprovable cover story.
So if the drug war was just theater, let's unpack the real drivers. Your sources suggested 3 critical ones.
Okay, so the first and most transactional was just pure political expediency.
A deal.
A classic Trump deal. The thinking was, a military win leads to immediate oil sales that boost the U.S. economy right before the midterm elections. You're basically selling Trump oil for a political win.
A short-term move with no eye on long-term stability.
None at all. And that brings us to the second and maybe the most significant motive, geopolitical strategy. Specifically, the BRICS alliance.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, Iran.
Right. And you have to remember, Venezuela is operating outside the U.S. banking system. So the sources argued this whole operation was set up as a, quote, crucial test of paper tiger quality for those BRICS nations.
Unpack that for us. What does paper tiger quality mean here?
It means if the U.S. can successfully take out a sovereign government in the BRICS orbit.
A government they supposedly support.
Exactly. And if China, Russia, and Iran can't do anything to stop it, it sends a message that the BRICS alliance, as a global counterweight, is fundamentally weak.
So the real audience for this wasn't in Caracas, it was in Beijing.
That's the argument. It was all about testing the resolve of these rising powers. And the third motive.
This one felt more personal, almost.
It was. It points directly to long-standing Cuban influence, and particularly the efforts of politicians like Marco Rubio.
The idea being if Maduro's regime falls.
Then the Cuban regime, which is economically dependent on Venezuela, could collapse right after. It's a decades-long political goal for many.
And Rubio was the one who publicly justified it by saying Maduro wasn't a president, just a cartel head.
He called him the head of the Cartel de los Soles, and that is absolutely critical.
Because it creates a legal loophole.
A huge one. If he's a gangster, not a head of state, you can argue you're not violating the Constitution by pursuing regime change. You're just taking out a cartel leader.
It's a blank check for executive power.
And this institutional deceit, it's just magnified by the aftermath. The operation itself was called an incredible success, a clean checkmate.
The classic mission accomplished moment.
But it totally overlooks the most important question. What comes next?
Right. We've seen this movie before in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're great at the removal part.
We're incredibly effective at it. But the failure is always in the long-term aftermath. And in this case, there wasn't even an occupation plan.
Just shatter the structure and walk away. The hubris is staggering.
It really is.
And that takes us right to the domestic front, because if you need that level of institutional deceit for foreign policy,
You have to ask if that same deceit is operating at home.
which leads directly to the failure to drain the swamp with the Epstein scandal as I think the primary example.
The handling of the Epstein files did profound damage to political credibility. The sources detail this alleged cover-up, contrasting these bold campaign promises to release this stuff.
With the reality, which was mass redactions.
Mass redactions and just dizzying rhetorical pivots. You had figures like Pam Bondi claiming there were tens of thousands of videos and hundreds of victims.
She set an expectation for total transparency.
An expectation that was immediately crushed. Then you had officials like Kash Patel come in and argue that releasing the information would re-victimize the women.
Which to the public sounded completely nonsensical.
It did. Because the perceived re-victimization was coming from the cover-up, not from the truth. It just created this immediate sense that the administration was protecting the gators in the swamp, not draining it.
And that feeling, that sense of a cover-up, it even bled into these smaller interactions. The source mentioned an incident with a reporter asking about the files.
And allegedly getting called a fat pig. That kind of defensive, aggressive reaction only confirms the suspicion that something is being hidden.
That the compromise was bigger than even Epstein's own crimes, and it wasn't the only institutional failure.
Not at all. Let's talk about the controversy around Russiagate.
A huge one.
Your sources point to the release of a classified report by Tulsi Gabbard, who claimed the documents showed a treasonous conspiracy by the Obama administration to undermine the 2016 election.
And even more than that, didn't the documents suggest that the intelligence agencies themselves didn't really believe Russia interfered in a meaningful way at the time?
That's the allegation. So you have this dominant political narrative that drove years of policy and investigation, which was potentially contradicted by internal intelligence.
And a former director of national intelligence alleges a treasonous conspiracy, and nothing happens.
Nothing. And that is the ultimate definition of institutional self-protection. It sends a very clear signal that for the powerful, accountability is a myth.
Which brings us to the 2020 election interference and Mark Zuckerberg's stunning admission.
That was a revelation, wasn't it? His conversation with Joe Rogan.
He just laid it out there.
He explained that the FBI visited him right before the Hunter Biden story broke. They explicitly warned him about a potential big Russian dump.
And so Facebook suppressed the story.
Actively. Through its algorithms. This wasn't just a passive mistake. This was direct government-fueled influence on an election narrative.
Putting a thumb on the scale.
A very heavy thumb. So you see the pattern. Centralized institutions, intelligence agencies, politicians, tech giants, all acting together, often using fear or deception.
And objective truth becomes secondary to the institutional agenda.
Which brings us perfectly to our third section. The all-out fight for information control that resulted from this collapse in credibility.
There was a really unusual clip from CBS News that the sources highlighted.
It was shocking, really. You had a host on a legacy media outlet publicly acknowledge that, quote, People do not trust us like they used to.
For them to admit that on air is almost unheard of. What reasons did they give?
The host ran down a whole list. Their coverage of NAFTA, the Iraq War, Russiagate, COVID lockdowns, and, of course, the Hunter Biden laptop story.
That list is basically a confession of every major institutional failure for the last 20 years.
It is. They essentially admitted their own propaganda model had cracked. And once that crack forms, the panic sets in.
Because their filtered narrative can't compete when independent media can just surface a different perspective instantly.
And that panic is so evident in some of the suggestions being made. Your notes quote an Israeli cybersecurity billionaire, Shlomo Kramer.
What was his solution?
His solution to the information crisis was to, quote, limit the First Amendment and control all the social platforms in order to protect it.
Destroy free speech to save it. That's dystopian.
It shows a deep-seated fear. They know they're losing control of the information spigot.
And it's because independent figures are now driving the conversation.
Exactly. Podcasters or vigilante journalists like Nick Shirley, who exposed that massive daycare fraud in Minnesota, those stories are forced onto the public stage from the outside, and legacy outlets have to respond.
And the most profound example of this backfire effect is the shift in public perception on international conflicts, specifically what's happening in Gaza.
Absolutely. A former Obama speechwriter was cited observing this huge shift, especially among young people.
They're seeing the raw, unfiltered carnage in Gaza on TikTok.
It's immediate, it's visceral, it's emotional. It completely bypasses all the rational geopolitical arguments. And the sources pointed out this massive historical irony.
Like Holocaust education.
Right. Decades of education designed to prevent genocide taught young people to identify with the weak and emaciated against the big, strong oppressor.
The Nazis.
And now, young people are applying that exact historical template to the current conflict.
They see powerful Israelis hurting weak, skinny Palestinians, and the emotional conclusion is,
you fight Israel. The decision is made by the heart, from seeing that destruction, not by the brain-processing complex political arguments.
And that's the big takeaway. Once the centralized powers lose control of the imagery, the human emotional reaction just takes over and tears down decades of carefully built allegiances.
It supersedes everything.
So let's try to synthesize this. We've looked at a period defined by just profound institutional betrayal. Epstein, Russiagate, government manipulation of social media.
And a compromised media that's now openly confessing its own failures.
All of this set against a backdrop of aggressive, ambiguous foreign policy like the Venezuelan regime change. The theme is a complete lack of accountability for those in power.
And the core struggle, as the founding documents laid out, is still between that centralized power structure, which thrives on currency debasement and endless war, and the American ideal of individual liberty.
That's what figures like Ron Paul argued for decades. It wasn't just about foreign policy, it was about the integrity of the Constitution.
Which is supposed to be the law of the land, something every politician swears an oath to.
Yet we saw people like Marco Rubio justify the Venezuela operation by just relabeling Maduro. He's not a president, he's a narco-terror organization head.
A linguistic trick. A legal maneuver designed to let the government openly bypass Congress and the spirit of the Constitution for regime change abroad.
And that systemic use of loopholes to pursue these goals against a country posing no immediate threat, well, it raises a really provocative final thought for you to carry forward.
If the government can openly and successfully violate the Constitution to pursue foreign regime change, what is the real legal recourse? What is the meaningful check or balance available to an American citizen if they believe their own rights are being violated by that same unchecked, concentrated power?
If the constitutional limits can be shredded abroad, what truly protects them at home? That's something to keep in mind as you try to sort out the noise. Till next time.